They called her sweetheart. They told her to fetch coffee. And they laughed when she said nuclear safety comes before profit. But that arrogance almost turned Naval Base San Diego into a radioactive wasteland. When a gruff civilian contractor bypassed safety systems on the USS Leviathan, alarms screamed through the reactor chamber, radiation warnings lit up the control room, and a commander who was mocked for being just a pretty face in uniform suddenly became the only line of defense between sabotage and meltdown. While Washington officials pushed her to cooperate, Alexandra Lex Morgan faced a choice: obey politics or protect her crew. What began as casual sexism and bureaucratic pressure became the most dangerous reactor crisis in U.S. submarine history. And as federal agents closed in, Lex uncovered a conspiracy reaching far beyond one arrogant technician, straight into the halls of power. What happened next would prove that Commander Morgan wasn't just fighting for one submarine. She was fighting for the very integrity of the Navy itself. The morning sun cast long shadows across Dry Dock 3 as Commander Alexandra Lex Morgan stepped onto the USS Leviathan's hull. Her auburn hair was pulled back in its regulation bun, emerald eyes scanning the maze of pipes, cables, and equipment that surrounded her nuclear submarine. Today was supposed to be routine, a scheduled reactor coolant system inspection during their 2-week maintenance period. But nothing involving nuclear reactors was ever truly routine. Commander Morgan, Lieutenant Commander James Burke approached, his expression tight with barely concealed frustration. "We've got a situation with the civilian contractors." Lex turned, noting the tension in her executive officer's voice. Burke was normally unflappable, having served under her command for 3 years. If something was bothering him, it was serious. "What kind of situation, Jimmy?" The lead nuclear systems technician, Robert Caldwell, he's challenging our safety protocols. Says we're being overcautious. Burke's jaw clenched. "Ma'am, he's been here since 0600, and he's already bypassed 2 security checkpoints without proper authorization." Lex felt that familiar tightening in her chest, the same sensation she'd experienced during combat operations when something was about to go very wrong. 20 years of military service had taught her to trust that instinct. "Show me." As they walked toward the reactor compartment access, Lex caught sight of Chief Petty Officer Angela Flores emerging from the submarine's forward hatch. The experienced nuclear technician's face was flushed with anger. Her typically composed demeanor cracked. "Chief Flores," Lex called out, "report." "Ma'am, that civilian contractor just told me to fetch coffee and let the real technicians work." Flores' voice was steady, but her eyes blazed. "He's refusing to follow contamination protocols and insists on using outdated inspection procedures." But that was just the beginning of what would become the longest day of Lex's naval career. Inside the reactor compartment's outer chamber, the situation was even worse than Burke had described. Robert Caldwell, a heavyset man in his 50s with graying hair and oil-stained coveralls, was arguing loudly with Petty Officer Second Class Kevin Brooks, the young security watch officer. "Kid, I don't need some baby-faced sailor telling me how to do my job," Caldwell was saying, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "I've been working on nuclear systems since the Carter administration." Standing beside him, Marcus Blackwood, a thin, nervous-looking man in his 30s, nodded eagerly. "Mr. Caldwell has 25 years of experience with civilian nuclear facilities. He knows what he's doing." Lex stepped into the chamber, her presence immediately commanding attention. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm Commander Morgan, commanding officer of the USS Leviathan." Caldwell looked her up and down with undisguised skepticism. "Well, well. Another pretty face in uniform. Don't worry, sweetheart. We'll have your boat fixed up in no time. Why don't you go powder your nose and let us men handle the real work?" The chamber fell silent. Burke's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm. Flores's eyes widened in shock. Even young Brooks seemed to sense that something monumentally stupid had just been said. But Lex's voice remained perfectly calm. "Mr. Caldwell, this is a nuclear-powered vessel of the United States Navy. Every procedure, every protocol, every safety measure exists for a reason. You will follow them to the letter." "Listen, little girl." Caldwell stepped closer, his breath reeking of coffee and cigarettes. "I was splitting atoms when you were splitting hairs in middle school. These submarine reactors are just toys compared to the commercial plants I've worked on. I don't need some academy princess telling me—" "Stop." Lex's voice cut through his rant like a blade. "You have 2 choices, Mr. Caldwell. Follow naval protocols or leave my submarine immediately." Caldwell laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the reactor compartment walls. "You can't kick me off this job. I've got a contract with the Navy Department. Besides, Captain Hartley specifically requested our company because you military types don't understand civilian nuclear technology. What happened next would change everything about submarine maintenance protocols." "Commander Morgan," Captain Douglas Hartley's voice crackled over the intercom. "Please report to the base command center immediately. We need to discuss the contractor situation." Lex exchanged glances with Burke. "XO, maintain watch over the reactor compartment. No one touches anything without Chief Flores' direct approval." "Aye, ma'am." The walk to the base command center gave Lex time to think. Captain Hartley was a political animal, someone who'd climbed the ranks by avoiding waves rather than making them. If he was calling her in, it meant someone important was pressuring him about the civilian contractors. Hartley's office was a study in naval tradition, ship models, framed photographs of aircraft carriers, and enough brass to outfit a marching band. The captain himself sat behind his desk, looking uncomfortable. Beside him stood a man in an expensive suit whom Lex didn't recognize. "Commander Morgan," Hartley began carefully, "this is William Thornton from Department of Energy Oversight. He's here about the Caldwell situation." Thornton smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Commander, I understand you've had some friction with our contractor. Mr. Caldwell comes highly recommended from our civilian nuclear program. Perhaps we could find a way to work together more cooperatively?" "Sir, with respect, Mr. Caldwell has violated multiple safety protocols and shows flagrant disregard for naval procedures. I cannot permit him to continue working on my reactor." "Commander," Hartley's voice carried a warning tone. "Mr. Caldwell's company has a $40 million contract for submarine maintenance across the Pacific Fleet. His expertise could save the Navy significant time and money." But Lex wasn't backing down. "Captain, no amount of money is worth compromising reactor safety. If Mr. Caldwell cannot follow our protocols—" Thornton interrupted. "Commander Morgan, perhaps you're not aware of the bigger picture here. The Navy is under pressure to reduce costs and increase efficiency. Civilian contractors like Mr. Caldwell represent the future of military maintenance." "Then the future is going to be radioactive," Lex replied flatly. The tension in the room was palpable. Hartley shifted uncomfortably while Thornton's smile became forced. "Commander, I hope you understand the consequences of being uncooperative with Department of Energy initiatives." "Are you threatening me, sir?" "I'm simply pointing out that career advancement often depends on one's ability to work within the system." Lex stood up slowly, her emerald eyes locked on Thornton's. "Sir, my career advancement is less important than the safety of my crew and this submarine. Mr. Caldwell follows protocols, or he doesn't work on my boat. That's not negotiable." But as she left Hartley's office, Lex couldn't shake the feeling that this confrontation was far from over. Back at Dry Dock 3, the situation had deteriorated further. Caldwell had convinced two junior technicians to help him bypass several safety interlocks, claiming they were bureaucratic nonsense that slowed down real work. "Chief Flores," Lex called out as she approached the submarine. "Status report. Ma'am, Caldwell has been trying to access the primary coolant system without proper radiation monitoring. When I refused to give him the access codes, he said I was hysterical and typical for a woman in a man's job." Lex felt her jaw clench. Where is he now? Inside the reactor compartment with that Blackwood guy. They brought their own equipment, stuff that hasn't been certified for submarine use. That was the final straw. Lex strode toward the submarine's access hatch, Burke and Flores close behind. The familiar hum of the reactor compartment's ventilation system greeted them as they descended into the submarine's heart. Caldwell was hunched over a control panel, using a device Lex didn't recognize to interface with the reactor's monitoring systems. Blackwood stood beside him, holding what appeared to be an unauthorized diagnostic tablet. "Mr. Caldwell," Lex's voice cut through the electronic humming. "Step away from that console immediately." Caldwell didn't even look up. "Almost got it, sweetheart. Your submarine systems are more primitive than I thought. This should only take a few more minutes. I said step away from the console now." "Relax, princess. I know what I'm doing. These old reactor designs are simple compared to modern civilian plants. Just need to recalibrate a few parameters and..." Suddenly, alarms began blaring throughout the reactor compartment. Red warning lights bathed everything in an ominous glow as automated systems detected an unauthorized intrusion into the reactor control systems. "What did you do?" Burke shouted over the alarms. Caldwell's face had gone pale. I just tried to update the calibration protocols. The system should have accepted the new parameters. But Chief Flores was already at the emergency control station, her fingers flying over familiar switches and buttons. "Commander, he's triggered a reactor scram protocol. The system thinks we're under attack." Lex pushed past Caldwell to the main control panel. Years of submarine experience kicked in as she began the complex process of determining what exactly had gone wrong. The reactor hadn't actually shut down, but multiple safety systems were now in conflict, each trying to respond to what they perceived as different threats. "Blackwood, what was on that diagnostic device?" Lex demanded. The younger man stammered, Just standard civilian nuclear protocols." Mr. Caldwell said they would optimize the submarine's performance. "You idiot," Flores snarled. "Civilian reactor protocols are completely different from naval systems. You might have just fried half our control circuits." The magnitude of the crisis was becoming clear. If the reactor control systems were damaged, the USS Leviathan could be out of commission for months. Worse, if the contamination spread, the entire dry dock facility might need to be evacuated. "Chief, I need a full diagnostic of all primary systems," Lex ordered, her training overriding her anger. "Burke, get me Captain Hartley on the comm. We need to implement emergency containment protocols." "Commander," Caldwell's voice was shaky now, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. "I can fix this. I know these systems better than anyone." Lex turned to face him, her emerald eyes blazing with controlled fury. "Mr. Caldwell, you have done enough damage for one day. You will leave this submarine immediately, and you will never set foot on any vessel under my command again." "But I can leave now." The next 4 hours would test every skill Lex had learned in her 17 years of naval service. Working alongside Chief Flores and a team of naval nuclear technicians, Lex began the painstaking process of untangling the mess Caldwell had created. The civilian diagnostic device had indeed introduced incompatible protocols into the submarine's control systems, creating a cascade of conflicts between safety systems. "Commander," Flores reported, her voice tight with concentration, "the primary coolant monitoring system is showing irregular readings. Caldwell's device corrupted the calibration algorithms. Can we restore from backup protocols?" "That's the problem, ma'am. He overwrote the backup systems too. We're essentially flying blind on coolant temperature and pressure readings." Burke appeared at Lex's shoulder. "Commander, Captain Hartley wants an update. Department of Energy is asking about the status of their contractor. Tell Captain Hartley that Mr. Caldwell's expertise has potentially compromised a $40 billion nuclear submarine. If DOE wants an update, they can read my incident report." But even as she spoke, Lex was mentally calculating worst-case scenarios. If they couldn't restore proper monitoring of the reactor's primary systems, the submarine would need to be towed to a specialized facility for complete system replacement. The cost would be enormous, but more importantly, it would take the USS Leviathan out of service for potentially 6 months. "Ma'am," Petty Officer Brooks called out from a secondary station, "I'm getting some unusual readings from the reactor compartment atmospheric monitors." Flores immediately moved to check the readings. Her face went pale. "Commander, we've got elevated radiation levels in compartment 7. Something's wrong with the containment seals." The situation had just gone from bad to catastrophic. If radiation was leaking into the submarine's compartments, they were facing a potential environmental disaster. Naval Base San Diego would have to implement emergency protocols that could shut down operations for weeks. "All personnel except essential nuclear qualified technicians evacuate the submarine immediately," Lex ordered. "Burke, get me the base radiation safety officer. Flores, initiate emergency containment protocols." As the submarine filled with the organized chaos of emergency procedures, Lex found herself facing the most difficult decision of her command. The safe choice would be to evacuate everyone and wait for specialized nuclear emergency teams from Washington. But that could take days, and if the radiation leak was getting worse, they might lose the entire submarine. The alternative was to stay and try to fix the problem herself, using her years of nuclear submarine experience to diagnose and repair systems that a civilian contractor had badly damaged. "Commander," Burke appeared beside her, his face grim. Captain Hartley is ordering immediate evacuation. Department of Energy wants to bring in their own emergency team. How long? 18 hours minimum, ma'am. Maybe longer if they have to fly specialists in from the East Coast. 18 hours was too long. If the containment seals were failing, radiation would continue leaking into the submarine's compartments. By the time the specialists arrived, the USS Leviathan might be so contaminated that it would need to be decommissioned. But what Lex discovered next changed everything about their understanding of the crisis. Chief Flores, Lex called out as she studied the radiation readings more carefully. These atmospheric readings, are you sure they're accurate? Flores double-checked her instruments. The readings are consistent across all monitors, ma'am. We definitely have elevated radiation levels. But look at the pattern. Lex pointed to the display screen. The highest readings are near the diagnostic ports that Caldwell was using. This isn't a containment failure, it's residual contamination from his unauthorized equipment. Understanding dawned on Flores' face. You think his diagnostic device was contaminated? Think about it. He said he's worked on civilian nuclear facilities for 25 years. Those plants handle different types of radioactive materials than our naval reactors. If his equipment was contaminated with civilian nuclear residue, it would show up on our atmospheric monitors as a radiation leak. Burke finished, understanding the implications. But it wouldn't necessarily mean our reactor containment is compromised. Lex was already moving toward the diagnostic ports where Caldwell had connected his equipment. Sure enough, the radiation readings were highest right around the connection points. This is surface contamination, not a leak from our reactor systems. So the submarine isn't compromised? Brooks asked hopefully. Not by radiation, Lex replied grimly. But Caldwell's interference with our control systems is still a massive problem. We still can't properly monitor reactor temperature and pressure. For the next 2 hours, Lex and her team worked to decontaminate the areas where Caldwell's equipment had been connected, while simultaneously trying to restore proper function to the reactor monitoring systems. It was delicate work, requiring both nuclear expertise and an intimate knowledge of submarine systems. Commander, Flores called out from the main control station. I think I've found the problem. Caldwell's diagnostic protocols didn't just overwrite our calibration, they changed the fundamental parameters that our monitoring systems use to interpret reactor data. Can you reverse it? Maybe. But I'll need to manually recalibrate every sensor in the primary coolant system. It'll take hours. And if I make a mistake, the reactor could overheat before we know it. Lex finished. It was a risk, but the alternative was admitting defeat and letting civilian contractors take over one of the Navy's most sophisticated submarines. Chief, begin the recalibration procedure. Brooks, monitor atmospheric readings for any changes. Burke, I want you to coordinate with base command. If this goes wrong, we'll need emergency evacuation procedures ready. But as Flores began the painstaking process of recalibrating the reactor monitoring systems, Lex couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important about Caldwell's sabotage. Commander, Burke's voice carried a new note of urgency. I just got off the comm with Captain Hartley. Department of Energy is insisting that Caldwell be allowed back aboard to correct any misunderstandings about his work. Lex felt her blood pressure spike. Absolutely not. That man nearly destroyed my submarine's reactor control systems. Ma'am, they're saying it was a simple miscommunication about protocols. Caldwell claims he can fix everything in 30 minutes. The man who caused this crisis wants to fix it. Lex's voice was dangerously quiet. Burke, if Caldwell sets foot on this submarine again, I'll have him arrested for sabotage. Commander, Flores called out from the control station. You need to see this. I found something in the diagnostic logs that Caldwell's device left behind. Lex moved to look over Flores' shoulder at the technical readout on the screen. What am I looking at, Chief? These aren't random protocol errors, ma'am. Look at the pattern of changes Caldwell's device made to our systems. Flores highlighted several lines of code on the display. He specifically targeted our reactor safety interlocks and emergency shutdown procedures. Burke leaned in to get a better look. Are you saying this was intentional? I'm saying no one accidentally modifies this many safety systems without knowing exactly what they're doing. Flores replied grimly. Either Caldwell is the most incompetent technician in the world, or he deliberately sabotaged our reactor controls. The implications were staggering. If Caldwell had intentionally damaged the submarine systems, it wasn't just a case of civilian arrogance. It was an act of sabotage against a nuclear-powered vessel of the United States Navy. "Chief, can you prove this?" Lex asked. "The diagnostic logs show exactly what his device did to our systems. No competent nuclear technician would make these specific changes by accident." Lex felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. "Burke, I want you to run a background check on Robert Caldwell, full security clearance investigation, and I want to know exactly which civilian nuclear facilities he's worked at in the past 5 years." "Aye, ma'am. What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that a man who's worked on nuclear systems for 25 years doesn't accidentally sabotage submarine safety protocols. There has to be another explanation, but the truth about Robert Caldwell would prove to be more shocking than anyone imagined." While Burke conducted his investigation, Lex and Flores continued working to repair the damaged reactor control systems. It was exhausting work, requiring absolute precision and concentration. One wrong calibration could trigger a real reactor emergency, not just a false alarm caused by contaminated diagnostic equipment. "Commander," Brooks called out from his monitoring station, "I'm picking up increased activity around the dry dock. Looks like security is setting up some kind of perimeter." Through the submarine's periscope, Lex could see black SUVs and men in suits converging on Dry Dock 3. "Looks like our friends from the Department of Energy aren't taking no for an answer." "Ma'am." Burke's voice crackled over the comm system. "You're not going to believe what I found about Caldwell's background." "Go ahead, XO." Robert Caldwell's security clearance was revoked 3 years ago after an incident at a civilian nuclear facility in Nevada. He was suspected of selling technical information to foreign contractors, but charges were never filed due to lack of evidence. Lex felt her blood run cold. What kind of technical information? Reactor control system vulnerabilities, the kind of information that could be used to sabotage nuclear facilities. And somehow he got a contract to work on naval submarines. Gets worse, ma'am. The company that hired him, Thornton Nuclear Services, was founded 6 months ago by William Thornton, the same DOE official who was pressuring Captain Hartley to let Caldwell continue working. The conspiracy was becoming clear. Thornton had created a fake contracting company to give Caldwell access to naval nuclear systems. But the question remained, was this industrial espionage, foreign sabotage, or something else entirely? "Chief Flores," Lex called out, "how much longer do you need to complete the recalibration?" "Another hour, maybe 90 minutes if we're being careful." "We don't have 90 minutes. Those suits outside are probably planning to storm this submarine and let Caldwell fix his sabotage." But just as the situation seemed hopeless, help arrived from an unexpected source. "USS Leviathan, this is Admiral Rachel Sterling, Pacific Fleet Nuclear Operations. Commander Morgan, I understand you have a situation down there." Lex grabbed the comm handset with relief. Admiral Sterling was a legend in the submarine community, one of the first women to command a nuclear submarine, and now the highest-ranking female officer in naval nuclear operations. "Admiral, we have evidence that civilian contractor Robert Caldwell deliberately sabotaged our reactor control systems. I've refused to allow him back aboard to continue his work." "Commander, I've been reviewing the reports about your situation. What's your assessment of the submarine's current status?" "Ma'am, we're working to repair the damage to our monitoring systems. My nuclear technician believes we can restore full functionality, but it requires time and precision work." "How much time?" "Another hour minimum, Admiral." "You've got it, Commander. I'm implementing emergency security protocols around Dry Dock 3. No one boards your submarine without my direct authorization." Relief flooded through Lex. "Thank you, Admiral." "Commander, I want you to know that your stand against these contractors hasn't gone unnoticed. There have been similar incidents at other naval facilities. Your documentation of Caldwell's sabotage may be the key to stopping a much larger conspiracy." The weight of responsibility settled on Lex's shoulders. The USS Leviathan wasn't just one submarine. It was part of a fleet-wide vulnerability that hostile actors were trying to exploit. "Admiral, we'll have full documentation ready within the hour." "Outstanding, Commander." "And Morgan." "Yes, ma'am. The Navy needs more officers willing to put safety above politics. Keep up the good work." With Admiral Sterling's backing, Lex and her team were able to complete the repair work without interference from Thornton or his planted contractor. Chief Flores' painstaking recalibration of the reactor monitoring systems was successful, restoring full functionality to the submarine's nuclear controls. But the larger investigation into the contractor conspiracy would reveal threats that reached far beyond Naval Base San Diego. 3 hours later, USS Leviathan's reactor systems were fully operational and properly monitored. The radiation contamination from Caldwell's equipment had been cleaned up, and the submarine was ready to return to active duty. "Commander," Burke reported as they secured the reactor compartment. "Admiral Sterling's security team arrested Caldwell and Blackwood as they tried to leave the base. Apparently, they had classified naval technical specifications on their equipment." "What about Thornton?" "Federal agents picked him up at his hotel. Turns out Thornton Nuclear Services was funded by shell companies with connections to foreign intelligence services." Lex shook her head in amazement. So this was actual espionage, not just corporate corruption. "Ma'am, Admiral Sterling wants to brief you on the broader investigation. Apparently, similar incidents have occurred at submarine bases in Norfolk, Pearl Harbor, and Bremerton. Your refusal to cooperate with Caldwell may have exposed a major security breach." Chief Flores emerged from the reactor compartment, looking exhausted but satisfied. "Commander, all systems are operating within normal parameters. Whatever Caldwell was trying to accomplish, we've undone it." "Outstanding work, Chief. What's your assessment of the damage he could have caused if we'd let him continue? If he'd completed his modifications to our safety systems?" Flores considered the question carefully. "At best, we would have lost the ability to properly control reactor temperature and pressure. At worst, he could have triggered a reactor meltdown that would have contaminated half of San Diego. The magnitude of what they'd prevented was staggering. By standing up to civilian contractor pressure and refusing to compromise naval safety protocols, Lex had potentially saved thousands of lives and prevented an environmental disaster." "Commander," Brooks called out from the communication station, "Captain Hartley requests your presence in the base command center. He says Admiral Sterling wants to discuss your recommendations for improved contractor security procedures." As Lex prepared to leave the USS Leviathan, she reflected on the day's events. The pressure to compromise safety for political expedience was nothing new in the military, but the stakes had never been higher. Nuclear submarines represented some of the most sophisticated and dangerous technology on Earth. Protecting them required constant vigilance against both external threats and internal corruption. "XO, secure the submarine and dismiss the emergency response teams. Chief Flores, I want a complete technical report on Caldwell's sabotage attempts. Include everything. Every system he accessed, every modification he attempted, every protocol he violated." "Aye, ma'am." "And Burke, good work today. All of you performed exceptionally under extremely difficult circumstances. The real victory wasn't just saving the USS Leviathan, it was proving that naval safety protocols existed for a reason, and that experienced military professionals were still the best protection against those who would compromise American naval security for profit or espionage." 6 months later, the contractor security investigation led to arrests of foreign agents in 12 countries and a complete overhaul of naval facility access procedures. Robert Caldwell and William Thornton were convicted of espionage and sentenced to life in federal prison. Commander Alexandra Morgan received a commendation for her role in exposing the conspiracy and was promoted to captain ahead of schedule. The USS Leviathan returned to active duty with enhanced security protocols and the knowledge that their commanding officer would never compromise their safety for political convenience. Chief Petty Officer Angela Flores was awarded the Navy Achievement Medal for her technical expertise in repairing the sabotaged reactor systems. Her detailed documentation of Caldwell's modifications became the foundation for new submarine security protocols fleet-wide. But perhaps most importantly, the incident at Naval Base San Diego established a new standard for contractor oversight at naval nuclear facilities. Never again would foreign agents be able to use fake contracting companies to gain access to America's nuclear submarines. As Captain Morgan often told her crew in the months that followed, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, especially when that vigilance means saying no to people who think they outrank physics and nuclear safety. The USS Leviathan continued to serve with distinction, protected by a crew that had learned the hard way that some compromises are too dangerous to make, no matter who's asking.